So once again, students, thank you all so much for logging on. This is going to be a fantastic morning for you to get some experience networking with real employers. You're going to be able to ask the questions that you want to ask, get the information that you want to get, and then they're going to go ahead and be sharing some really great information too. And then later on, you'll be able to sit in on a meeting, which is really exciting and going to be some really great experience. So as I've said a couple times, go ahead and scan that QR code. It'll give you access to the Pathway program where you will be able to have access to tons of events just like this one, hour-long insight events, one-on-one mentoring, CV, cover letter, LinkedIn workshops, and just tons of different events that are going to help you as you're in school and leaving school. So for today, these are the ways that you can communicate. You can go ahead and type anything you want in the chat box at any point. So please do utilize the chat box. You're going to get out of this day what you give. So make sure that you really take advantage of the time that you have this morning, ask your questions, make any comments that you may want to make in that chat box. And the beauty of today is that this is also a meeting format. So you're totally welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question in real time. If you'd like to share your video, more than welcome to do that. Really take this time to actually network and actually speak to these employers, because that's going to be a really great experience for you. So please do. We really encourage you to ask those questions by unmuting your mic as well. So I just want to quickly introduce myself and Izzy from Pathway. So my name is Rosie. I'm the events manager. So I work on all of our events behind the scenes, the setup, and then I go ahead and host the events as well. Izzy, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Izzy. I'm an account manager here at Pathway. So I look after our employer and client side of the business.
Perfect. Thanks, Izzy. So that's just a little bit about us. We're going to be in your breakout rooms with these employers today. And actually, if right now we want to take a minute to introduce Peter, Billy, John, and Rachel. Do you guys want to say a few words before we go ahead and jump into those breakout rooms?
Sure. Well, first of all, for me is apologies. I'm so late. My only excuse is that my spoke on my bike went and it brought my derailleur off, and I had to walk my bike for for the last half an hour. So I'm drenched, but really lovely to see you all today, and looking forward to having a chat with you. And I hope we can just be of some use to you today. Just pick our brains. We're here for you. And look, I would have been really grateful when I was your age, just to be able to ask any questions that I might have about a career that I was thinking about. So just, go ahead, ask us whatever you need to, and just feel comfortable to no question is a stupid question. So my name is Peter Vanderswan, and I work for Pollard Thomas Edwards Architects, and I'll pass on to the next person.
Great. John, do you want to go next?
Yeah, can do. Thanks, Rosie. So, yeah, I'm John Eccles. I'm a building services engineer, and we've been working with Peter and Billy and Rachel for a number of years now on various projects. So, again, I just echo what Peter said. Just ask away with any questions. It's likely that you don't fully understand exactly what we do, but please ask, and we'll try and explain it as best as we can, and give you some encouragement to think about this as a career choice. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. Rachel, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Morning, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Yep, I'm Rachel from Price & Myers. We're a firm of structural and civil engineers. And yeah, as John said, we've been working as a team on a few projects in South Kilburn over the past few years. And I also have my colleague Billy with me as well, if you want to say hello.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Billy, and I work with Rachel and John and Peter, and I do all the civil engineering, so drainage and external works and everything, but we can go into that in a bit later.
Great, perfect. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and break out into these speed meets. So we're going to go ahead and split up into two rooms. One room is going to be with Peter and John, and one with Rachel and Billy. And students, you'll have about 25 minutes in both of these rooms to ask your questions. They'll give a little bit more of an in-depth introduction into what they do. But this is your opportunity to ask those questions to get the knowledge that you want to get. I know Izzy encouraged you to come up with a few questions beforehand. So please do use this time to ask those questions and anything that may come up as well. This is going to be a really fantastic opportunity for you. So it is 9:14. I'm going to open the rooms in just a minute here. And then we'll leave these rooms at about 9:35, 9:40. I'll go ahead and give you a warning about 5 minutes before when it's going to be time to switch. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and open the rooms now. Everyone just oh, Peter, did you have a question?
Just really quick question. Rosie, can we ask the students a bit about them so that we can, sort of in a way, shape the information that the conversation a bit around them?
Absolutely. Do you want to do that now or in the rooms?
But maybe in the rooms is easier for students.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that might be a little bit more intimate in the rooms. So why don't we do that? Students, when we get in the rooms, we're going to go ahead and then ask you to just share a little bit about yourself. A few of you have already popped in the chat what year group you're in, but just a little bit more about your interests and why you came here today. So that'll be great for us to know. So just give me 1 minute here. I'm going to open the breakout rooms. And then Peter and John, I'll meet you in your room to get started. And Izzy, you'll be with Rachel and Billy. So see you all in just a few minutes.
Rosie. Guys, if it's okay, if you feel comfortable, camera on, camera off, or whatever, could each three of you just give us a bit of a snapshot of where you are and kind of what the information you'd like to get from us, and we can sort of shape hopefully kind of how we help you this morning. Is that okay? I know it's Monday morning. I don't know if you've had enough coffee yet, but if it's okay to do that, we'd be very grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Students, could any of you go ahead and unmute your mics and tell us a little bit about yourself? I see we have Vanessa, Taida, and Tomi here. Oh, great. Vanessa, thank you. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm Vanessa. I'm going to year 12 in September, and I've joined this because I'm stuck between choosing engineering or finance. And because I have 2 years to go before I go to uni, I need to kind of figure out what I'm doing. I do like engineering and how it does involve maths and physics and all of the sciences, because I really do enjoy that. But then finance also interests me as well. So that's what I'm here for.
Cool.
Thanks,
Vanessa.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Taida, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Taida. I'm in year 13, so I literally just finished. I got an offer to study architecture at Cardiff University, so I just wanted to join today to learn more about architecture as a career and what it can lead to in terms of different kinds of architecture and that kind of thing as well.
Brilliant.
That's great. We've got a mix. Peter, that's great. A potential engineer and a potential architect. That's really good.
Yeah. I don't mind. Do you want to? Who's Rosie? Who's? Should we flip a coin? Who should start off?
No, you can go ahead and start, Peter.
So Taida, maybe I'm probably speaking to you more than Vanessa, I suppose. What I might do is just so to kind of tailor this a bit towards you. So you said you're looking to. Can you just repeat which architecture school you had an offer for, if you don't mind me asking you again?
Cardiff University.
Ah, fantastic. Okay. Okay. Well, Cardiff is great. We the practice I work for has quite a few links to Cardiff, and we've been sort of taking students, I suppose, from Cardiff for many years now. But what I might just do, Taida, is just give you a brief introduction to ourselves, because figuring out just from listening to what you were saying, it's interesting because architecture could take you in all sorts of different routes. It's quite a wide and sort of broad profession. I started out in Dublin. I kind of fell into architecture because I didn't really know what to do. I was doing some furniture making with my dad, and kind of we moved house about 15 times. So I sort of after renovating about sort of 15 houses, I kind of had an interest in it and sort of fell into architecture, but not really knowing much about what I wanted to do. So my sort of things at school that I was good at was art, obviously, mechanical drawing. I don't even know if they still do those kind of things today, and then languages. And so architecture, just I sort of fell into it really. But it's been a good career for me because it's quite broad, and it if you're the kind of person who's who likes people and likes working with people, it's good because you in a job like this, say for example, I'd have to work a lot with people like John and Billy and Rachel. And so you kind of you work as a team. It's not a very isolated kind of a career. You're directly involved, you know, on a day-to-day basis, trying to work through problems with other people, which is quite good. So if you have a focus on people, that's really useful for you. Or if you're into you know, solving tricky problems and being more technical, you can exist in the career in that way easily as well. So depending on what your bent is, there's quite a lot of room basically to move around in it. And then the practice that I work for personally, so then I went to Dublin to do my my university part of the project, or part of architecture. I then moved to New York for a couple of years, worked there for a little bit, got quite a lot of experience, came back to then to move to London, where I did my part 2 in a London practice, and I've been there for been here for about 13 years practicing. So it's a long route as well. I mean, you're probably aware of this by now, but it's been really rewarding for me, and it's something which I'd highly recommend, because it can take you in lots of different directions. And I'll stop monologuing in a minute just to give a bit more time to talk very briefly about the company. But the other benefit of architecture is that a lot of my friends have now moved out of architecture into the public sector. They've moved for clients. They've moved into one of my friends just started working for what's that really famous cemetery in Hampstead? I think Hampstead Heath Cemetery or something. And she's working as a client, and she advises, or she acts as a client, basically employing architects and engineers and things like that to work on projects. That's really interesting for her, because she's quite sort of, she prefers that world as a client. Another friend of mine has just moved into the public sector, and he's working for a local council, and he's advising them on master plans, and he's kind of getting into the nitty gritty of master plans. So I mean, I don't know if any of this is sort of resonating with you at all, but you can go in so many different routes and pathways in architecture. And I'm sure it's probably the same for John as well, and his career, but you might be surprised where it might take you. So Rosie, can I give a 5-minute overview of who I work for as well? Is that useful, or do we have time?
No, absolutely. Yeah, we have plenty of time. Don't worry.
Okay, so Taida, I'll give you, and we've somebody else joined us as well, actually.
Yeah, I see. Favor, if you just want to take a minute to introduce yourself and say kind of why you joined today, that would be fantastic.
Hi, I'm Favor.
Hi.
I'm going to uni in September, so I joined just to get a brief understanding of how architects work, and things they do during their during their normal day at work, or and different routes you can take after getting an architect degree, kind of thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for joining. Everyone else introduced themselves already, but just this session, Peter and John are just kind of going over what they do, how they got there, and answering any questions you may have. So feel free to really get into it and ask any questions that you may have throughout.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Favor. I was just explaining to, I think we've someone else today on the line as well, who's looking to do architecture. So I was just briefly saying that you can, it's really good, Favor, because it's a career that's quite wide. So depending on your skills, if you're a people person or if you're a technical person, you can find a kind of a place within the career which is quite good for you. So I was quite sort of intimidated when I went into architecture, because I wasn't very good at maths, and I was quite good at art and languages, and the sort of thinking at that time was that you had to be really good at maths to be an architect, and it's completely not true. So but then there are people who were really good at maths, and they find their place in the profession as well. So it's really, really broad. And then what we'll do is when we do the hour after this, we'll do a meeting between all of ourselves, Billy, Rachel, John, and myself, and we'll kind of take you through a sort of a typical meeting that we might have on an average day, and you can see what that entails. But being an architect also is sometimes kind of quite public facing, because you do a lot of meetings in public. So for this project, for example, we would do a lot of meetings with local residents for the buildings that we're designing. So we'll do kind of co-working workshops with those people. But then we'll also do public meetings where we'd open up an exhibition for a project that we're doing to the public, and people would just come in to that exhibition off the street. Well, pre-pandemic, they would have just come in off the street and we would have explained them the different aspects of the project. So you could be quite a kind of a public-facing person, or you could be more interested in working in the background. You can basically, the career can kind of take you wherever you want to go. But I will just give you a brief just view of what we do. If I can share my screen.
Are you able to share your screen? Or do I need? Great.
Can you see something?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So we are just so for us, I suppose one of the things I mentioned earlier on as well is that as architects, we work with loads of different people. So John is here as well from Environmental Services Design, and he's a service engineer in the project. Rachel and Billy are from Price and Myers. They're the structural engineer and the civil engineer. So you can see here there's a really big team of people. So we as architects will do the design of the building, and you'll see in the second hour kind of the sort of nuts and bolts of what we do. But a big part of it is that we need to work, or we should be able to work well with other people, because a building is something that needs a lot of expertise to design. It's not just us who does that. And we then, a lot of the buildings that we do are all about sort of housing and communities and master planning for different parts of cities. So we need to be thinking about people as well, and the sort of end users of those buildings and what the experience of those kind of people is. That's really important to us when we're designing buildings. And then I suppose just the trajectory of architecture. I mean, our company started off in the 70s when people didn't really, London was depopulating, it was quite derelict. Whereas now at this point, we're at the point where London is very much, sort of a world city, attracting a lot of investment, and the scale of projects that we're all working on is really massive. And John's working on some other really, really interesting projects as well all over the country. But within this kind of scope of scales and in different parts of the country, and master plans or technical stuff, again, a huge scope of things. You can sort of find your pathway into these kind of things. And then this is just kind of an example of some of the homes that we work on. Some of the buildings are quite tall. Most of the buildings that we do, we like to keep buildings down as close to the ground so we can kind of activate as much street life as we possibly can in the homes that we design. But this is a building that we've just got planning for in South Kilburn. So that's something we've been working for Brent Council on. And then the day-to-day, so how an architecture practice is set up. I mean, this is sort of what we look like. I think there's now 170 of us at the moment. We're kind of growing quite rapidly again because we're very busy. But again, all sorts of people in architecture. We're looking at architecture is sort of pretty much 50-50 male-female. So there's a good split like that. And my boss is this lady here, Kay. So I work in workshop 5. I work for her, and she's a partner in our practice. So again, the sort of the idea of architects, when the profession sort of, even I guess like 20 years ago, I suppose, when this lady down here, Teresa, started off working in our practice, to be a woman in architecture, she was the only female in the room most of the time when she was going to meetings. It was quite a difficult, challenging time for her. But these days architecture is quite broad, and there's lots and lots of space for all sorts of different people with different backgrounds. And
Peter, can I just ask a quick question about that?
Go for it. Yeah.
So is that typical throughout all of architecture now, or is that just at PTE that it's a pretty 50-50 split?
It's just at PTE and a few kind of London practices who kind of, practices all over the country who make a huge effort to try and get to that. But it is something that we consciously make happen. There is definitely more men architects out there than there is female, I think.
I think I'll jump in as well, Rosie. I mean, we work with other architects as well as Peter's company, and on other projects, and specifically in London, where we go to meetings with design teams and clients. And certainly over the last sort of 10 years, there's become much more equal arrangement on when you see people in meetings. There's certainly as many women involved now as there are guys, and we see that commonly across the spectrum. So it might not be wholly 50-50 as Pollard Thomas Edwards set out to be, but there's often I can be sat in meetings where there's more women than men, and on the professional team. I mean, you'll see we've got We've got two ladies on the engineering team in the other breakout meeting, and it's certainly much more common than perhaps it was 15, 20 years ago, as long as I've been in the profession.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of efforts to have more like inclusion and diversity.
It's effort, but it's also, I think, a recognition, particularly by girls as they're leaving school, that engineering and construction is a pathway for them. I mean, this isn't just reflected in professional teams. You can go onto building sites now and working for contractors. There's a lot more representation from females on sites. It's nowhere near 50-50 on sites, but certainly for contractors in offices, in some really important roles, there's a lot more females now. Yeah.
I mean, our client on this particular project that we're all working on is female. All of that team is female, 100% in Brent. My boss here, Kay, is female. I mean, so in this particular case, it's in a sort of London environment. It's really, really common to be sort of in a 50-50 or more female. I've been to meetings in Surrey, in a project in Surrey 2 years ago, where there was 25 people in the room and they were all male. So there are still some problems in the industry, but in London you're a little bit insulated from that, I think, which is quite good.
Great, yeah.
No, I don't think I have. I mean, I'm not going to talk too much more actually, because I don't want to monopolize this. Is it okay if I stop and then John speaks?
I can pick up if you want, Peter. I mean, it's interesting, Vanessa, that you're in a position where you're contemplating which way to go, whether engineering is a subject you want to continue pursuing or whether it's finance. I mean, these things are very different, I would imagine. If you've got an interest and you've got an ability in the maths and sciences, then certainly I would keep engineering pretty much at the forefront of what you're thinking, because like Peter, there's an incredible or there is potential for an incredible sense of achievement in the role that you undertake. Not only are you interacting with other professionals and meeting lots of people, I think what I've had out, the biggest thing I've had out of this, my career, is the ability to be involved in actually creating something. We create places and we create buildings that often stood there, probably going to be there a lot longer than I am. And if you buy into the whole process, these become very personal to you. They become your buildings, and it's great to be able to see those, and you can share those with friends and family. You can explain to them what your involvement is, and it soon it's something that people can get an understanding of what your role is. And certainly from an engineering point of view, our role in projects is much different now than it was 20 years ago. I don't know if you're on the previous event that Rosie organised, but from a building services point of view, our focus now is not just necessarily about heating and ventilation and lights and power and things like that make a building work, but it's more about much more focused on global warming and carbon reduction, and our influence over the architecture of a building is much greater now than it was previously. Peter and his team talk to us about where a building sits on a site, what it looks like, how we actually construct the building, how we make it super insulated, how we make it airtight, how we make it much more energy efficient and carbon efficient. And that's a huge focus of what we do now, as opposed to just doing lots of engineering calculations and drawings. And that is, well, we're only really at the start of this. The next 20, 25, 30 years, that's going to be a huge focus of the construction industry in this country. And it's led from design teams involving the likes of Peter and myself, because often clients don't know what they want, don't fully understand exactly how a building is going to work, and they need to be influenced and guided by us. So, the skills that you pick up along the way and the experiences you get from every project, you take forward and apply your engineering skills and apply, Peter said he wasn't very good at maths. I was good at maths, so I could use that in my engineering. But then, because you've got certain skills, the likes of Peter and his team in architecture, they can start to rely upon you. You give good advice, they come back to you again, and we can start to build relationships that move from one job to the next. And I think that if you're keen to be able to demonstrate a product at the end of your working day, you can actually see something that's getting built. I think engineering and construction is a fantastic opportunity, and there's some fantastic companies out there as well. In the UK, we've got some of the best engineering companies in the world based here, the likes of Arabs and AECOM and Hawley and Borough Happol. They're all internationally recognised consulting engineers who are right at the forefront of design of carbon mitigation, carbon expenditure mitigation, and I think some of the projects they get involved in, they're exemplar across the whole world. And British engineers still are in a huge demand to work across the world as well. I've done some work in the Middle East, done a little bit of work, and certainly as expansion and development of projects in Hong Kong, China, the Middle East and America, British engineers have been in high demand for those roles. So, and again, that will continue, I suspect.
John and Peter, I just want to give you a heads up. We do have about a minute left. I'm just about to send a warning here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if we could just get to Vanessa's question quickly before we switch rooms. She wants to know what happens off-site.
Do you, Vanessa, could you just expand on that a little bit more? Do you mean
before we get to site? Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we start to build, yeah.
So yeah. God, it's such a. So we'll start off the project. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I was going to explain that. I think it's interesting to understand when you see often you see a building being constructed, and it could be, depending upon the size, it can take anything 12, 24 months, something like that, depending upon the size of it. Well, actually, before we even start to build, Peter and I, in our teams, we could be working on the scheme for 2, 3, 4 years in some cases, because a client will come with a piece of an idea of what they want to build on a piece of land, and we've got to turn their ideas into plans. We have to work from building up the layers of design information from basic understanding of how do we fit 250 apartments on this site, or what more can we get from it? Build up the layers of information, then seek various levels of approval to the design information that we've generated, whether that be from local authorities or the government in some cases. We have to cost check it, so we involve other professionals to come and make sure that what we're designing is in line with the costs that the client can afford, and ultimately design and produce drawings and specifications that are sufficient to allow a contractor to actually start work on site. And that whole process, depending upon the size of the job, can take years, Peter, in your experiences as well, I guess. Yeah.
We have Lucy here as well from the quantity surveyor as well, actually, and we're probably have no time whatsoever to even
we do have to switch right now, but when we go back into the main room, I was going to have Lucy say a few words then, if that's okay.
Great. Oh, great.
Perfect, thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and switch you guys, and I'll meet you in the next room in just a minute. Thanks, students. You'll see Billy and Rachel in just a minute here.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Cool. I think we've all moved across now.
Yeah.
Fab. So hi everyone, hope you're all okay. So today we're going to hear from Billy and Rachel, and they're going to give us a bit of an intro to kind of how they got to their engineering career, what they've done, and then perhaps show us a few things, and then we can answer some of your questions. Cool. So over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, sure. I guess we'll start with where we started before, just how we got into engineering. So I did maths and physics and DT kind of at A level. Didn't really know what structural engineering was or anything, but I had a few engineers in the family which helped, and kind of was made aware about civil engineering. So I studied that at Bath University for 4 years, master's degree. Also managed to get a couple of summer work placements in an engineering firm as well. And then I joined as a graduate at the practice I'm in at the moment, and I've been here 10 years now, doing structural engineering, building lots of buildings. So that was kind of my route into it. And then we've got Billy here, who is a civil engineer, and she can explain a little bit.
Yeah, so my route was similar A levels, so I did maths, physics, and then more maths. And I didn't really want to go down the accountancy route, which I thought was the kind of the only route with maths. And then my maths teacher actually mentioned to me about engineering because he did that at uni. So I was like, oh, maybe that could be something I'm interested in. And then obviously there's so many different engineering routes to go down, but I knew I liked like buildings and knowing how they were built and constructed. So I was like, let's do civil engineering. So I went to study that at Loughborough University for 4 years, and one of those years was a placement year. So I worked in Malaysia actually for the whole year and just learned how they did it out there, which is quite different to us. And then, yeah, when I graduated, I came here to Price & Myers, and I've been here since. So so my course was civil engineering, but as we were saying before, it's kind of crosses over. So lots of it is structural, and then some of it's infrastructure and services and stuff. So we'll go into that in a bit, but that's what I do.
Yeah, cool. I guess, Izzy, do we know what particular interests these students have? Or?
I know that I spoke to Vanessa last week and she's interested in engineering. So Vanessa, feel free to ask any questions in the chat box or unmute yourself. And then, yeah, so if we could hear from the other students, so Taida and Favour, if you want to pop in the chat box kind of what you're interested in, if you feel comfortable, and then if you have any questions for Rachel and Billy, they can then answer them for you.
Cool. I guess whilst we wait for a few questions, we could cover what we did before.
Yeah, sure.
What I do compared to Billy, because we did basically the same degree but have gone down two very different routes. So
yeah, that'd be fab.
So I'm a structural engineer. So I did just share a little bit of a background presentation just for a couple of minutes, just so you can see. So yeah, we just shared this picture of London, and hopefully you kind of know what engineering entails, but just in case you don't, then it can cover everything you see in this picture. Rivers, roads, bridges, tall buildings, existing buildings, drainage under the roads. Further down the river you got the Thames barrier for flood defences. Everything in, you've got really historical structures in St Paul's that you still might be able to get to work on. You've got to maintain these old buildings. Then you've got new structures going up. You see lots of cranes all over London building all these great new buildings. So what do? I work with, you've just obviously chatted to Peter and John. So Peter's an architect. He gets a brief from a client, and he basically decides what the building will look like this image here. And then my job with my team and my colleagues here is to do the bones of the building, the structure. So this is actually a model of this image here, but just showing the structure. So it's the columns, vertical elements, it's the slabs, what you walk on, and these red bits are just extra bits of steel work that form the balconies that you might have on your flat at home, and then also the foundations that you can see poking out. So they're piles, they're big concrete circular columns essentially that are driven into the ground and support this building, so it won't settle and won't crack and move over time. So we have to work closely with Peter and John to make sure our structure doesn't clash with doors, with services, pipes and things like that. So we mainly do this in a 3D model because it makes it easier to coordinate. And from that 3D model, we produce our drawings. So a builder can build from it. And on top of that as well, we might have to do a bit of hand sketching, write specifications and write reports as well. So just to show you, this is an extract of a 3D model of another building we're doing with Peter. And again, this is just the structure, and we can spin round this. You can zoom in, you can see the balcony slabs, the columns, and you can, easily cut a plan section through it, and we produce our drawings like this to show where our columns are, how thick the slab is. And whilst we produce drawings like this, there's a lot of work that goes in behind this. So I need to do calculations to prove what size that column needs to be to take the load on it, so it won't buckle and it won't fail. Same with the slab. Make sure that can, span between these columns and not fail. So support, all your furniture and yourself if you have a party. Make sure it can support, a crowd that are in there. So yeah, that's basically our job, making sure every building you see around you is safe and can stand up and can take the loads that are kind of imposed on it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. We've got a question here. Does engineering provide a lot of traveling opportunities, and is there a work and home split?
Yeah, definitely. So I think Billy already mentioned you'd had a year in Malaysia as a student. And yeah, I mean, there's traveling, definitely. I mean, engineering is everywhere. You can join a firm that has offices all over the world, and any degree you do here is easily transferable to work elsewhere. You might have to do a bit of extra studying to learn their ways about doing things, but definitely, yeah. Even I've only worked in the UK, but even within the UK, that we have projects all over as well. So you can travel within the UK or abroad if your company kind of allows that. And then the work home split, I don't know if that's about kind of working from home, but obviously the past year has been quite different. We've all kind of learnt to work from home, and there is a flexible kind of working policy where we can work from home a couple of days a week. But hopefully, if you've kind of understood from what you've heard today already, we're quite a collaborative kind of job. So it's much easier to be in person with your colleagues to talk things through and have drawings out on the table rather than trying to do that remotely. But yeah, maybe Billy, if you want to say something about your time in Malaysia, or
Yeah, I just agree with you, Rach. So it's so transferable. Obviously, engineering's needed in every country, everywhere. So yeah, I'd definitely say there's opportunities for travel. And obviously, I did a placement in Malaysia, which was amazing. And it's just really interesting to see how different places work, because obviously, well, not obviously, but they work a lot faster. So their health and safety is a bit iffy. So they can get things done quite a lot faster. But it's just good seeing the difference in how things work. But yeah, definitely it's useful everywhere you go. So it just depends where you like, what kind of firm you work for, if they have offices abroad and that kind of thing. So that's probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah, Billy, how did you go about getting that placement in Malaysia? Like, was it a company that worked there, or did they give you a few options of places to go?
Yeah, so it was, my university had a link with a university over there. So they just had I can't remember the name of the university, but they basically had a relationship with them, and then there was a company that worked with that university in Malaysia.
Okay.
So they just had a working relationship with them that they would allow, like, I think it was 6 people a year could go out and work with them. But I think a few other universities have it as well, where they have branches in like China or other places that you can go over there and study or work. So I think it just depends on the uni, but it was all through my university.
It
Cool.
might be worth mentioning, we mentioned it in the other room. Billy did a company called Engineers Without Borders, who offer, well, they do events kind of in London, but also you can join them to work for them, and they work in, you know, Africa and places like that, and they try and build schools,
Mm.
you know, in these poor communities. So, you know, it's really going back to basics and really kind of rewarding work in terms of helping a community in Africa. So, yeah, there's plenty of opportunity to travel.
Fantastic, thank you. Billy, should we see some of the
Yeah, of
drawings that you
course.
showed us last time so that we can see your side of engineering?
Yeah. So can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is like a typical drawing that I would issue out. So you can see all the structure in the light grey in the background. And then all of my stuff is mainly below ground. So structural engineering is in the ground as well with the foundations, but a lot of it is above ground with the columns and the roofs and the walls, but all of mine is basically below ground. So this is just drainage. So all of our water points that John would set out in the building. So he'd connect all the toilets, the sinks, the washing machines, everything, and then it would come down a pipe through the building. And then I just pick it up below ground, and then I take it to the nearest sewer. Or if it's surface water, I take it to the nearest water course if possible, or sewer. So that's the basic route. So these are just manholes, and then all the pipes take it around the building. And for surface water, so all the rainwater that hits the building or the paving outside, it's a bit different. So to prevent flooding of the sewers, we have to attenuate the water. So we store it in different kind of sustainable systems. So this one, we're kind of limited with space. So we need to have a big attenuation tank, which is just crates basically that store the water in big storm events. So it doesn't overwhelm the sewers. Let me show you in 3D. It's a bit more impressive. So this is all the structure of the building, just from the ground floor down. And then you can see all our manholes and pipes. And then this is the big tank that would store the water. So that's just, it doesn't look like that, but it kind of does. So that's just how it looks here. And then you can see that it would just go to a sewer. So that just shows how much we have to coordinate with all the structure. So we normally go under, okay, that's missing, I thought it was hitting it. So we go under the structure or through the ground beams, it just depends. And we just have to work with a structural engineer on the job and make sure we're coordinating right. And then another aspect of my job is cut and fill. So this is just a big job, like a residential job. And basically cut and fill is where we have to work with the existing levels and what our proposed levels are going to be, and make sure we minimize the difference between the material we're taking off site and the material we're bringing on site. So we use a program that makes a layer of the existing ground, and then it also makes another layer of the proposed ground and works out the difference. So this, you can see all the different colors. So the more red it goes, the worse cut there is. So here there's like 4.5 meters of cut. So that's 4.5 meters of material that we're taking away. And ideally, we would be able to put it in these green areas, which is where we need to lift up the ground. So it's just a balancing act. So that's how we optimize the cut we're taking off, the fill we're bringing in, to make sure there's minimal difference. So we're not wasting a lot of material. So that's one of the other things. And then probably the final thing that I'm going to talk about is road design. So this is the building that I was just showing in 3D with all the drainage. And this is in South Kilburn. And it's all the roads in between all these blocks and all the parking bays, all the footpaths. So we have to design all the levels. And you can see all the contours that show that the level is cambering. It's a road that cambers, and then the parking bays go into it, and it works with all our drainage. And we basically have to work to the Highways Authority standards. And we model it in 3D in this kind of program that it does a lot of it for you, but there's still some design I have to do. So we basically just model all the roads, all the curbs, and just make sure it works and doesn't flood like a lot of roads did yesterday. So we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. Or if it does, it can be contained within the curb so it doesn't flood buildings and things. So yeah, that's a bit of a snapshot of civil engineering.
Fantastic, thanks, Billy. Do we have any questions about any of that for Billy, or just in general about engineering? See. Not at the moment. Oh, Vanessa says, who double checks if you have mistakes? I was thinking about that.
That's a very good question.
It is.
Good question. 'Cause
Because
they
it
do
is a bit of a
happen.
stress.
Yeah, they do happen. We're all human at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, from my side, obviously, there's obviously quite there are checking processes. So you'll do your calculations either by hand or on some computer software, and a more senior engineer who is involved in the project will check that, provide comments if something doesn't. As you build up your experience, you kind of learn what kind of looks right. Like, if there's a really small column to a 15-story building, then you might think that doesn't look right. Let's have a look at that. And then as you get kind of more to construction, there are quite often kind of third-party engineers who will check your work separately. So that would be a completely separate company who would kind of review your drawings, your comment on them, highlight something you might have missed or a mistake, which does happen. That's why we have the checking process. And it's particularly important when you're building next to another structure like your neighbour, which we call a party wall, to make sure you're not impacting on their building or their house. You're not going to damage it. And same for kind of building next to roads and railways and things like that. So there are processes out there, but also in our design, we have factors of safety as well. So we don't design on the nose. There are factors of safety in our design that if you have underestimated something or made a little mistake, there's normally enough capacity in the design because you've factored things as you've gone along, which is all kind of set out in what we call design codes. So yeah, and I think it's similar for Billy as well from her side.
It's very similar, and I was worried about this when I first started as well, because you think these things are going to literally be built in the ground or built above ground, and it's quite stressful to begin with. But then you realize that there's so many layers of not even formal checking. Just say if you start to work with a contractor and they've done it before and they know that like that pipe won't be big enough, or that manhole has to go somewhere else, or that column needs to be different. It's lots of other people's experience feed into what you're doing. So it's not like you on your own. You get a lot of feedback from other people as well. So I get the worry, but it's not actually a worry when you start doing it.
Yeah, and how long before it actually gets built would you be doing these kinds of things?
It kind of depends on the size of the job and whether you get planning permission quickly, because that's normally what halts it. Some of my jobs I'm still working on, or they're just coming to an end from when I started, so about 3 years ago. So if that was a big job, so that took about 3 years, and they're just finalizing it now. Or others, smaller jobs, take maybe a year or two. The design process varies between other jobs, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you perhaps start your, as Billy said, depending on the size of the project, but say you've got a smallish kind of project, you might spend 6 to 8 months actually just designing it with Peter and John and Billy and making sure everything works. It would then get costed. So you go to a few builders and that's a tender process. So they'll say, well, it's going to cost us this much to build this. And then you get that. And then you appoint your builder. And then it could be another year to actually build it. And we're still on hand to answer questions throughout construction. Inevitably the builder might put something in the wrong place and you might have to quickly redesign something, or, they might not put the right material in, not the right strength concrete, things like that. So all the way up until it's finished, we're kind of, on hand. But yeah, it can take a good few years to go from kind of your initial inception of the building all the way through to completion.
Cool, thank you so much. That's been so useful. I know that we're going to leave in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So back to the main room. Thank you. And thanks for your great questions.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen quickly. Great. So now we're just gonna, so we have the meeting that we're all going to attend here in just a few minutes, but we also have Lucy here that we're going to hear from just quickly to talk a little bit about her experience as an apprentice and kind of what to expect as an apprentice. So Lucy, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So my name's Lucy. I'm a quantity surveying apprentice. So I'm on sort of the cost side of buildings. I am 23, so I'm in the final year of my apprenticeship to becoming, so the route to becoming a chartered surveyor. I started off 4 years ago and I did a year at university, decided it wasn't really for me. And so I went into the apprenticeship route. I do sort of day release, so I'm 1 day at university, 4 days working. I think it's, for me, it really suits me because you learn on the job and you can apply what you learn on the job to university and vice versa. So you're sort of building, I feel like I've developed a lot better in my role than if I was to do 3 years at university and then start on a grad scheme or something like that. I've mainly worked on residential. So I've worked on sort of big 300 apartment developments, sort of mixed use buildings to sort of £180 million private houses in Hampstead Heath. Yeah, so I think that's a bit about me, really.
What level is your apprenticeship, Lucy?
I think it's a level 6. So I out at the end of the apprenticeship, I have a degree, a BSc honours degree, and then 6 months after I finish that, so I finish it in June 2022. Then in November 2022, I take my final assessment to becoming a chartered surveyor. And I'm not sure if I think it is level 6, yeah.
Yeah, cool. That sounds great. And what would you kind of give advice to the young people thinking about doing an apprenticeship or even going to uni? Because obviously you've experienced both.
Yeah, I mean, when I joined I think the last couple of years, apprenticeships have become much bigger things than they were. And they're much more sort of known about. I didn't really know that the apprenticeship route was even an option when I went to university. And I think it is something really to consider. I have 1 year's uni sort of debt, but actually I'm not stuck with £60,000 of student loan. It is much more, I think that there's more options available now than there were. And I don't think many people consider an apprenticeship. They think, so they sort of want to go and live the party uni life, but it is choosing a different path with an apprenticeship. But surveying is a very social job, and there's lots of networking, and there's lots of, I've been to lots of different networking events, and I'm sort of getting a different life with an apprenticeship, but not one that's worse, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of subjects did you do at school in order to kind of do this career, or was it something that you were always interested in?
So I think from a young age I've always been really interested in buildings and how they create communities around them, essentially, and how they can actually have a massive impact on the space around them. And when I was 16, I did 4 different weeks of work experience in building surveying. I did 2 in general practice surveying, and then a week in quantity surveying. And I then sort of, as I said, I didn't really think that the apprenticeship route was a thing. So I went and did real estate management at Oxford Brookes University. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting, it's very interactive, and I see what I have sort of been involved with and how it does affect, how it creates an environment around it. And to me, that's really, I've always been interested in actually being a part of something you can see makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Students, if you have any questions for Lucy, just feel free to put them in the chat box.
Yeah.
If you
also,
have
sorry, I didn't answer one of your questions, did I? I did at school. I did maths, economics, and politics for A levels. So sort of quite general subjects.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and thanks, Izzy, for kind of expanding on those. Really helpful advice for students. And again, yeah, put your questions in the chat box. Ask Lucy the things that you'd like to ask. So now we're actually going to go ahead and move on to our meeting. So Peter, if you want to go ahead and take away this meeting session, go ahead.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. We thought we'd give you just a bit of a taster of what we might do this would be more like a workshop meeting just between all of us as a design team. So today we've kind of assembled ourselves, architects. Rachel is here with Billy, Rachel being structural engineer, Billy being civil engineer, and Harshal being structural engineering as well. And then John on building services design. Now, Rachel and Billy, I'm not sure if we'll have you for this meeting. Is it just Harshal for joining us for this bit?
Yeah, I was going to stick around with Harshal to cover the structure, but I think Billy was going to drop out. That's okay.
Well, Billy is a crucial member of the team, so it's a shame that she's going. But Billy will advise us in the meeting that we'll just have. Billy will normally be really helpful advising us on the civil engineering aspects. And just Billy, before you go, because we'll start off the meeting, then could you just give the students a kind of a flavour of what of what you would what you'd be talking about in one of these workshops that we might have?
Yeah, so I'd normally be talking about coordination with our external drainage, our manholes, how that's going to work with the landscaping features and all the paving and everything. I'd also be talking about flood risk elements if it was in an area of flood risk. So what we can do to the building to make it less at risk. I also do, what else? Maybe for transport, I didn't mention this in the breakout rooms, but we also do some transport analysis. So if we're increasing units in a place that didn't have these dwellings before, there's going to be an increase in trip rates. So people coming to and from the site. So we need to make sure the roads around it have capacity. So I'd also be feeding into that to make sure we're taking account of all the implications that this building could have. But I think that's everything, is it?
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, thanks, Billy.
Okay, thanks everyone.
And then importantly to say as well is we have Lucy with us as well. So normally what would happen is we as a design team would probably have these workshops where we'd go through what we'll kind of go through today, just some of the technical issues that we'd have in a project. And then Lucy would normally be in those meetings with us, but we then would have a separate meeting afterwards with herself and her colleagues to talk about cost. Or sometimes she might be in a particular meeting that we have because it might be really relevant that there's something we need to figure out that has to do with the cost of a building. So there's a sort of a kind of a core group of sort of design team members such as ourselves who are focused on one specific thing, which is what we call coordinating the building. And then normally the reason why Lucy mightn't be in all of those meetings is because we sort of need to get our act together between ourselves first before she's smiling before we would give information to her, because what's important actually for cost sometimes is just to be a little bit more certain about what you're doing, so that before Lucy starts going through the cost of the building and measuring everything, correct me if this is not correct, Lucy. It's better if we have these kind of meetings that we'll have now today to kind of coordinate between ourselves, so that before she starts doing her work. And then just maybe just because I don't want to just dive in completely cold, I was going to just give a really brief overview to this building that we are designing, because it would just give students a little bit of context in terms of what this thing is that we're doing.
Yeah.
And then well, sorry. So then, well, either we could introduce ourselves first and then I dive into that, or I give us a slight background and then we individually talk about what we do on the project, and then maybe we have a little bit of a session where we show our models and we share them, and we go through some of the issues that we would encounter. Do you think will I do an intro first, or do people want to introduce themselves first, or will I give a brief project introduction?
I think if you did the quick project introduction and then everyone could kind of speak on exactly what they do, that would be great.
Great, because we can dive into the
exactly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So students, once again, throughout the session, put your questions in the chat box. Feel free to kind of participate if you feel comfortable. This is really meant for you and meant to give you a taste of what it feels like to actually be in a meeting with the design team and exactly what you would do. So really take advantage of this time with the team.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is just give a bit of an overview to this project, and what I'll present you today is probably a sped up version. I'll try and do it very, very briefly, of what we have just very recently, just last week, presented to the public. So on a project that we're designing, which is a residential project, it's for an estate regeneration in Northwest London. So in an estate regeneration project, we'll have a client, which in this case will be London Borough of Brent. We all collectively in this room today will work for that client. And then the people who will move into the buildings that we're designing, who live on the estate at the moment, will have co-design workshops with those residents, where we will kind of start off by speaking to them, kind of getting their ideas, what they like, what they dislike about their homes, and what they want in their future homes. And running alongside that, we'll also have meetings with planners, the public, the Greater London Authority, all sorts of other people as well. But this meeting that I'll show you today is a public meeting that we had last week, because when we design a project, we need to go out and speak to the public so that we can hear what local residents have to say about the project that we're designing, and hopefully get feedback from them, so that if they do have sort of valuable things that they need to say that we can incorporate into the project, that we can basically pick that up and incorporate it. So I'll do a very quick introduction. Just have a glass of water. And then we'll dive into the meeting after that. So, okay, so this is a list of all the people who will be working on the building. We're here today, Pollard Thomas Edwards, we're architects. We have structural and civil engineers, Price and Myers, who you have are on the call this morning as well, and who you will have met and who will introduce themselves after this. We also have a landscape architect, a planning consultant, a health and safety consultant, a fire consultant. John is here today from EST. He's an environmental engineer. And then we have Lucy, who is working for Total Project Integration, and she is advising on cost. And then, of course, we have Rosie and Izzy here today, connecting in with all of you today. So the kind of thing we speak to the public about, we'll set up a website at the moment where the public can just log on to this website, and they can see this presentation in real time, playing back to them. And they can leave feedback on the website as well. So then we'll get that directly. And so if somebody puts something on the website, I mean, at the moment it's predominantly about parking and cycling. Somebody will say, I don't like the cycle storage in the building. I think you need to consider having access to the cycle storage from, the inside of the building only, because currently another building was built next door where actually somebody was breaking into the bike stores all the time and stealing the bikes. So we'll get that kind of feedback coming through the website, which is really helpful actually for us, and it shapes how we design the building. So these kind of events where we kind of communicate with the public can be very, very useful for us as well. It's not just telling people about the project. Often when you get good feedback, it's really useful as well. So this project is part of a much wider master plan project. So we're in here phase 6, and so you can see the whole of South Kilburn is being kind of this little knuckle of South Kilburn is being kind of knocked down and rebuilt basically over the last couple of decades, and will continue on as well as we go forward. So here we are, this is our site, and all the way around our site are buildings which are being knocked down and rebuilt, or buildings which have just received planning permission. So all the context of all the buildings around us is continually changing. So when we're designing buildings, we're designing in response to buildings that are next door to us, but also buildings which are imagined that are just right beside us. For example, this building here, this site here, which is just all being knocked down, and it's about to be rebuilt. And luckily, Rachel, Harshal, and Billy are also working on this project here as well. So they've been able to give us kind of joined up thinking and coordinated advice on what's happening there. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of how long these things take. So before a project is submitted for a planning application, you can see here, October 2020 we started, and we'll submit this planning application in summer time or early autumn. So that gives you sort of an idea of how long this this part of the process takes. And it's and this isn't even before it goes on site. So following this, what will happen is the local authority will consider this as to whether they should approve it for planning permission or not. We'll go ahead and we'll do more detailed drawings, which we can give to a contractor to price. And then the client will make a selection of a contractor of who they want to build the building. But then, you know, it might take until, you know, 2026 before the building is actually built. So quite a long process in all of this. And the meeting we'll have today and the issues that we'll be discussing today are issues which will go along basically the whole way through this process up until it's constructed in some cases. So I'll fly through this. So some of our inspirations for the building are the old street network, which is really lovely, connected street network, lots and lots of overlooking to the street, windows and front doors facing onto, this is Carlton Vale, one of the old streets, which is completely different today, but that's what it used to look like. And the buildings that are on site at the moment are big 1960s blocks. They don't have any overlooking to the street. There are construction issues in the buildings which are very difficult and expensive to rectify. So it's more cost effective for the client to knock these buildings down and rebuild. And when we do rebuild, we think build better buildings which are more efficient, use less energy to run, and create a safer and more kind of, I suppose, joyful sort of street network around this area. So we've been then influenced by the London Mansion block and the New York Flatiron building, because we've got a collection of what we call street buildings, which are buildings about 6 stories tall, and then also some taller buildings, not quite as tall as this one, but they're about 16 stories. So we've been using those for inspiration. So here's the site and the existing 3 buildings. Sort of step 1 is we take those buildings down, as I was briefly describing. Step 2 is we reconnect a street through here, creating 2 separate blocks. We think about the hierarchy of the streets all around us. We're creating a new pedestrian link here and a new service road down here. Then we open up these things we're calling landscaped rooms, but they're basically just spaces in the blocks, which might lead to courtyards or courtyard gardens. Another key big thing is that we keep this really fantastic big existing London plane tree, which is really important to keep those kind of well-established trees. And then we get a family of buildings. One building, which is almost like a typical city block building, which we call a donut block. We have a gateway building here, which is picking up that influence from the Chicago style and the sort of New York Flatiron building. And then we have a sort of a building which we call a park facing building, because we've designed it so that it responds to the park across the way. All of the homes that we'll design in here, we want to have views in 2 directions, so that when you live there, you have the path of the sun throughout the day. You're not just facing in one direction and looking in a specific way and only having one light experience throughout your day. You want to have views and light, you know, in a sort of a diverse moving path throughout the day. Step 8 is to say that all those blocks have their own garden space, both at ground floor and at roof level. And then 9 is to say, okay, we've done some more chopping and slicing of these buildings just to absolutely maximize the aspects and the lighting to these homes. Then the next step 10, is that there's a commercial space down here for retail at the ground floor. And we designed that as a sort of a shelling core so that business owners could come along later on and do a bit more detailed design themselves on that. and we have a co-working space here as well. Something which is a new emerging thing, which we're designing more and more of these days. This looks like a simple diagram, but this is a really important one for us. This is about avoiding all the mistakes of the past, where we have buildings which have no windows overlooking the street, and there are serious security concerns for people walking around the buildings. So the buildings on site at the moment have picket fences running, or close-boarded fences running all the way around the buildings. There's no view of the street. And we've seen in London this year in particular, the issues around safety, around not having eyes on the street, people not looking at the street, so that people feel safe when they're walking around the city. And this is, I mean, I can't emphasize how important this is. This is a huge design driver for us, and it's influenced the cycle strategy for our buildings, where we've tried to take as many bike storage spaces on the ground floor and move them up the building, so that the ground floor is lots and lots of front doors, windows, kitchens, trying to make this thing as safe as is possible. And then the last one is to say that in terms of the mass of the building, which is just the word we use to describe the general shape of it, that responds to the things close to it. So we've got a tall part here because it's this kind of gateway part of the site. We've got smaller parts here and here where they're more the sort of traditional city block thing. And then the taller parts respond to the parts of the site where there's a bit more space around the building. So you know, this one here has a big park in front of it. So we thought, well, you can go taller there as well because it's not overshadowing as many things. And then these are just the principles that we've used, where we're trying to apply a really simple kind of logic from a historic context about base, middle and top. So the base is the stuff at the bottom, lots and lots of front doors, activation, windows overlooking the street. The middle is the kind of main meat and veg of the building. It's lots of windows, lots of the sort of day-to-day components of the building. And then the top, we've been inspired by Louis Sullivan's Guarantee building. Again, picking up on the kind of Chicago style of buildings, and making a really big cornice at the top of the building. And then bays, the rationale there is that instead of having the Victorian mansion block bay with the front room, we've now got really big balconies. So we thought it'd be great to have a really big, massive balcony in the bay as opposed to a living space. And then I will fly through some of these things. So then giving you some idea of spaces. So for example, when we speak to local residents, they'll say to us, we live in a building at the moment which all of our circulation spaces are internal dark corridor spaces. We don't have really good ventilation in those spaces, and we don't have natural light. So if a light breaks, there's a security thing that it can be quite stressful for us in those buildings. So we've tried to design these buildings where there is natural light coming into all parts of the building, be it main entrance spaces, courtyards, and all these circulation spaces around the buildings as well, so that residents feel like that there's lots of nice light and fresh air circulating around the building. And also this is a key thing for buildings these days, because as John might talk about later, we're super insulating these buildings so that they use as little energy as possible to run. And that means that when you have a really highly insulated building, a lot of the heat escapes into the corridors and can lead to really big problems with really overheated corridor spaces, which are a big issue across London. So we try to avoid that by having naturally ventilated spaces. And then these are just some images of the buildings. And then so to try and bring bikes off the ground, for what we're trying to do these days is, well, in this particular building, is have an atrium space where we can park bikes all the way up the building. So we don't just have an enormous bike storage space on the ground floor taking up tons and tons of room, which is quite expensive. We've tried to be just a little bit clever about it, trying to get it into little corridor spaces and little parts here and there where you can park your bike very, very close to your home, and then you take your bike down in a sort of a cargo lift down to the ground floor. But it means that the whole ground floor isn't completely occupied by bike storage spaces. And here's some of the images as well. And then this is what the buildings will look like at the front, facing onto Carlton Vale. We've got this co-working space here, and then further retail spaces at the top here, and then the residential all happening above. And then hopefully you can see these kind of New York Flatiron kind of influences coming into the buildings. And then just some detail about materials and how they're working, and how this kind of family of materials and street architecture, park fronting architecture, and tall building architecture are all sort of coming together into this kind of whole. And then a little bit about landscape and rooftop amenity spaces. And then John might talk about this in a bit more detail as well. This is the energy strategy. One thing just to pick up on here is, or two things, is that we're connecting into a local, a decentralized energy network, which is being built for this building for Brent, which is really great because it means we can plug into that, which helps us reduce carbon emissions overall. And then for us, we're trying to use passive design to, again, reduce carbon emissions of the building. And part of that is this idea of natural ventilation. Another thing is super insulating the building. But another thing for us is also having these kind of loges or balcony spaces, which are kind of well covered so that people can have a nice large glazing to their living spaces, but it's covered for sunlight and shading so that these buildings don't get too hot. And then a little bit about transport and highways and the program for the building. And then I will shut up, and that's a general interview or a general introduction done.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. So are we going to now jump into some introductions?
Yes, so I definitely will stop talking now, but my name is Peter van der Zoon and I work for Pollard Thomas Edwards, and my colleague Nick is here as well.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Nick. I'm trained to be an architect at Pollard Thomas Edwards as well.
Perfect, thanks. Do you want to go into kind of what you do a little, what drew you to Pollard Thomas Edwards, and how you're helping on the project?
Yeah, so what I do on this project, I do a lot of the modelling, which we might see later, preparing all the drawings, going through some like design ideas, discussing like all the design principles that Peter mentioned, what would work, those kind of things. I've been at Pollard Thomas Edwards almost 2 years now, which has flown by because of COVID. Everything flows by in COVID. I was drawn to Pollard Thomas Edwards because they have quite a good sustainability drive. I came out of university thinking that's really important. And this practice seems to take it very seriously. It's not just a whim to say, oh, we do sustainability when this is quite genuine sustainability. So that was what attracted me to Pollard Thomas Edwards.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Nick. Okay, who wants to go ahead and introduce themselves next?
I can jump in if you want.
Perfect, thanks.
So I'm John Eccles. I work for Environmental Services Design, and we're building services consultants on this project. And I suppose there's two key things that we do. In the very early stages, we work with Peter and the rest of the team to understand how the building needs to perform from a sustainability point of view, in particular energy reduction, meeting all the targets set by the government and the GLA, who mandate that the building needs to be performing much better than buildings that were designed 10 or 15 years ago. And what they actually state is that the building needs to have a carbon performance at least 35% better than it would have done 15 years ago, and actually should be targeting 100% improvement, which would be a building that generates no carbon emissions at all. So zero carbon is something you'll hear spoken about a lot in the press, and how government is trying to get all buildings to that stage. And although it's an aspiration for the local authority in London, they mandate that we must meet a minimum target of 35%, yeah, and then anything between 35 and 100% being zero carbon, would be, they basically impose a tariff. They charge the developer, the Brent Council in this case. So what we have to do is strike a balance in the early stages, working with Peter and the rest of the team to see where we fit between the 100% and the 35% as our minimum. And a lots of scheme, and Peter touched on the use of a district energy network for this scheme. That helps us hugely in that respect, because the district energy system creates heat energy in a very efficient, carbon efficient way. So it uses heat pumps and combined heat and power equipment to generate heat in a different way than just gas-fired boilers. Efficient in terms of energy, but also efficient in terms of carbon emissions. So we use that information from the District Energy Connect network to feed into our calculations, and then work with Peter and Nick on things like the fabric. So how insulated is the building going to be? How much natural ventilation? Can we recover any of the heat that normally gets thrown out when you put the extract fan on in the kitchen, in the bathroom? These sorts of things. How can the lighting be more efficient? And all those feed into a whole set of calculations that we advise planners. And then the second element of the things that we do is the nuts and bolts design. We've got to make all the systems work. So we've got to distribute heat, hot water, cold water, ventilation, heat, power, lighting around the whole building. We've got to make sure the TV systems, the Wi-Fi, data are all distributed and fed into each system. So that becomes a much more technical aspect, and we can share some of the drawings that we produce for that and how we feed into the members of the team.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John, for that. Rachel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so both Harshal and I are the structural engineers on the project. I know I've already explained a bit to a few of you already in the breakout rooms what we do. So maybe Harshal, maybe do you want to go into a bit of detail? Thanks.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi guys. Yeah, my name's Harshal. I'm a structural engineer at Price & Myers. I've been with Price & Myers coming up to 4 years in September. I started fresh out of uni, studied civil engineering at Brunel University. And yeah, I guess Rachel probably explained what we did in the breakout rooms. We take the architect's sort of vision of a building and make sure it stands up, to put it simply. We also obviously work alongside with M&E and landscape engineering throughout the project to just ensure we're all fully coordinated, particularly M&E, making sure all the holes and stuff are in the right place for the building. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what we do, simply help make the building stand up. We design the skeleton, essentially.
Thanks, Harshal. So great. I think that is everyone that's on to do their introductions. So Peter, if we want to go ahead and jump into the meeting part, that would be great.
At this point, we generally have a bit of a chit chat about what somebody was doing at the weekend, or John would sort of be telling us about how rainy it is up in Manchester, that kind of thing. But then we zoom into. So in this particular case, actually, we had a really good workshop last week where we issued, Nick alluded to this, the model that we're making, because we make everything in 3D models. We issued information in that model to Harshal and Rachel. And then Harshal went through the information in that model and also the information in the model that they were creating. And then sent us an email back basically with a whole list of things saying, well, actually, we need to coordinate this. We've got we need to put a column right down in the middle of your bin store at the moment, or your cycle storage area. And then we then have to kind of go, oh yeah, he's right, we need to support this because obviously the building needs to stand up. So then we'd have a meeting about how we the design approach that we need to do to as a team to make that work, which would either mean we change our design on the ground floor to accommodate a column, or it means we add in a sort of a smarter piece of structure, or a different structural approach to doing something to accommodating that. And then we try and figure that out. And the reason why that's really important, not just as Harshal alluded to make the building stand up, but something which Price & Myers, and I'm stepping on Rachel and Harshal's toes here by saying this, but are really hot on is trying to make that structure as efficient and small as possible, so that we're using as little as possible concrete as we possibly can, so that the carbon requirements to build this building is as small as possible. So I think John alluded to this as well, but the world that we live in today is very much imbued with, at every point, how can we reduce the amount of building materials that we use, and how can we be as clever as possible with the type of buildings that we do. So I think maybe the most interesting to do this would be, I don't know, Nick was going to share maybe a model just to show sort of some of the things that Harshal would have brought up, and then maybe we just talk about how it's a bit of a messy part of the meeting. Maybe we just talk about how we've kind of overcome those issues and where we've ended up. Nick,
Yeah.
are you great to share?
I can share. Let me see if this is going to work.
And then I think at this point, if anyone, I think personally, if anybody wants to just pipe in and just ask a question in the middle of this, if we could treat this as a normal meeting where actually you're all invited to this meeting, and you think, oh, just don't feel intimidated to speak up. Just kind of cut into us at any point and join the meeting. I think would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Students, really take advantage of that, because it's not very often that you get to sit in on a real meeting kind of with professionals in the field. So really take advantage of this time and feel free to jump in, because like Peter said, this is your meeting too.
I'll just run through what we're looking at.
Go for it, Nick.
Yeah. So this is our main software that we use. So this is really useful because previously, before technology kind of caught up, architects and engineers would all draw their drawings with a program called AutoCAD, which was you draw basic lines for each drawing that you wanted to produce. So if you want to produce a plan like this here, you would draw that, and then you would draw an elevation separately, and they'll all be separate drawings. And even before that, people would draw this all by hand, and that was hugely inefficient. So obviously technology's got a lot better recently. And now what we have is we can have our architect's model. So this is the project that Peter was showing earlier for the regeneration project. And we can have other consultants' models kind of all put together. So for example, here we can see that the red is Rachel and Harshul's structural model. So then what's really good about this is we can look at this in a meeting. And this is quite often what we do. We'll get this model up and say, okay, what's working, what's coordinated? Do we need to move some columns to accommodate the kitchen, for example, things like that. And it's really efficient because this is all now we're actually making a virtual model of the building that we're going to be building. So if I wanted to adjust this floor plan, for example, I can see so if I got rid of these windows, for example, I could see what it looked like from the street and things like that. So this is really useful way of working, and it's way more efficient than how it used to be. The other really cool thing.
Nick, can I jump in?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Chris, who works for me, is more involved in this job, but I'm going to ask some questions that I don't necessarily know the answer to. So that you're showing us a floor plan there. What's on that floor plan then? What are those? What actually is in that building?
Okay, so this is this point block here. Peter was describing this as a gateway building. So what we're looking at right now, I appreciate not everyone knows how to read plans that clearly. We're looking at, we have 6 flats. So there's one here, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's their floor plans. We have 2 cores. So this is the staircase and the landing and the lift. Like in any tall building, you obviously got to go upstairs or up a lift to get to your home. And then we have this atrium space, which is acts like a light well. So this is all nicely lit and comfortable. It's not a dark kind of unpleasant space to go through when you get to your home. So if you take this, for example, I'll take this flat. This is a 3-bed, 6-person flat, which we've tired over the layout of, actually. But what it's basically showing is you have two bedrooms. You can see the beds here, and they have their toilets, a shared toilet, and a small kitchen, or a kitchen, and then a kind of open plan living space. So that's this is basically what we're looking at right now. Another tool we have for this is if we want to know kind of how does it. This shows us only so much information. We can see how it's laid out, but we can't see how it feels. So we have this other program called Enscape, which ties into this, and it allows us to fly in and see how this feels. So then I can go into that flat and say, oh, this is actually rather nice. So yeah, so that's the kind of next level of information we have on this.
Can you see in this model then, Nick, I think the structure, Rachel and Harshul's structure is turned off.
It looks like our column is missing there. So,
yeah.
So the building will fall down.
At the moment it will. There's some coordination to be done, but you can see that here though.
The red, yeah.
you can see this is their structural model. These are the foundations of the model. I'm just looking at it in plan because it was probably clearer to see.
So on that plan, if you go back to that flat then, Nick, where the red elements are concrete structure to hold the building up, where you've got a concrete column in the middle of the cooker, for example, yeah,
exactly.
Which is the one that jumps out to me, yeah. So the purposes of this type of meeting now would be to move or to try and align that column so it sits in the wall, yeah. So that's
it might be useful if we pick up on that. I think we could refer to Harshall's quite clear sketches he did. It might be worth sharing that because he's done an overlay. Did you have it open, Harshall?
Yeah, should I share my screen?
It might be useful just to explain how we've gone about solving that.
Yeah, because I'll just run through what we did in the last meeting. That'll probably help. Make sure I share the right screen. Oh no. Can you see PDF?
Yeah, your plan. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so if I run through what we just went through in our last meeting for these blocks. So the main focus of our last meeting was stability, which is the building's ability to stand upright, essentially, and also those transfers that Peter mentioned. The columns that Peter mentioned that were coming down in our bin stores and cycle stores. I think if I run through which one here, so this is block 6B, and in this block we have a column which is coming down in the bike store, and initially the approach was to try and eliminate that column, but in order to do that we'd need to introduce quite a sizable transfer beam. So by transfer beam I mean so many. Essentially, the column at first floor stops, and we want an open space. And in order to achieve that open space, you'd have a beam going into the page to pick up that column and transfer it out to a column here and a column here. But in order to do that, the beam size we would need, it would introduce a 1.6 meter downstand. So that distance there would have been 1.6 meters, and that seemed quite excessive. So the outcome of the last meeting was to try and work around, was to try and reshuffle the layout essentially, so that we can actually have a column coming down at ground floor in that. So we don't need to design a transfer for that block. However, on the other block, we had two locations where we have columns which we needed to do the same exercise on. For the refuse area, we managed to play a bit of Tetris and try and reshuffle the bin layout so that we could actually keep the column coming down in that and eliminate the need for a transfer there. But for the bike store, we wanted to eliminate that column. Initially, we were going to do a transfer beam from this outer wall to this internal wall, where we would put some columns. But again, the downstand would have been quite significant. So during the coordination session that we had last week, we came up with the proposal to have two internal columns here and have a short transfer beam over, which has reduced the transfer down to about a meter, the downstand down to about a meter, which is quite a big reduction, which I'm hoping Peter's going to say is fine now to have that. Yeah, good.
Working well. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so then we're going to have basically two columns and a transfer over in that area now.
And that makes John's life easier because he's probably got to put a lot of surfaces under the ceiling.
Yeah.
And actually the less transfers that we have coming down, blocking his pathway to do things is useful for him as well. Or Harshal, I suppose you were talking about holes. Otherwise, you're creating an enormous hole in the downstand where you can bring your services through, which is, you know, something that needs to be considered as well.
Yeah. Yep. On 6, if I go back to 6B, so the other point we discussed was stability. So essentially, we are having a problem because this building is going to be exposed to wind pushing the building from this direction. And what we were having problems with was the tension that occurs in the walls. So at the moment, we have a core wall, which is this lift shaft and this stair core. But the problem is in this direction, we have very few walls.
What's a core wall, Harshal? Do you mind me sort of bringing that out a bit?
Core wall is it's essentially the spine of the building that runs all the full length of the building. That's the simplest I think I can put it. Usually that's also around that areas where the services is. It is essentially like the spine of the building, the nervous system of the building. But we rely on, so for example, if the wind is pushing in this direction, hopefully you can see that, we're relying on the walls that are parallel to that to try and resist that overturning. And we have quite short walls in that direction, which is why we're getting quite high tension in the walls at ground level. So what we discussed last week was introducing or going back and checking whether adding a wall along this line, which runs most of the way up the building, would work. It's still working quite hard, Peter. So what we're hoping is that we can add another wall along this line, which runs the full length of the building also. If I've sort of marked it up on this plan. So it runs all the way up. Continue. So over here, this shear wall would stop. And for the remaining length of building, it's only 3 stories. So that core and this core going up that length would be perfectly fine.
So can we just go down a floor? So that shear wall is one of those shear walls. It actually sits in an apartment, does it? It's not. It's not a party wall between apartments. It's actually within an apartment.
Yeah. Which you wouldn't normally do. We normally try and keep it always in the party wall so that you have a nice big piece of concrete separating both spaces, because for
so we did look at, I was thinking that as well, but the problem with, so the other thing we discussed in the last meeting was at ground floor we have a wet riser, and we want to try and eliminate that column within the center of the wet riser. So we can't have because that's essentially where that party
tank
wall
is.
And also above is where the party wall is, I think.
The interesting thing is when we put a concrete, the red wall in the apartment there is just to explain to the guys who are on the call. That's playing a major part in holding the building up, against those forces of wind. And so what we find as structural engineers is that services engineers is that the structural engineers get really sensitive about those bits of wall. They don't like holes through those walls at all, because it makes it really complicated for them to allow that wall to work. But where it is there is going to be really interesting for us, because between I can show some drawings as well of how between the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, we've got lots of services that pass through there, pipes and ducts and cables and things like that. So we've got to really carefully coordinate where the holes are cut through that concrete wall, so that we don't take away the strength of it. That becomes a really intricate piece of work that we try. I think it's fair to say we try and avoid that within an apartment. Yeah, if it's between two apartments, then that works really well. But I can see the complication of that.
Yeah, I think because we have a different ground floor layout. Peter mentioned earlier we've got a commercial space and plant rooms at ground floor, which, you know, gives a different wall layout to the apartment above. So even there, the wall Harshal has highlighted red doesn't quite line up with that faint grey line. So we're going to ask Peter nicely to move his wall. So we've got lots of offsets up the building, and as we mentioned previously, getting a nice efficient structure where everything lines through. Your forces are all central. That works really well. It's cheaper to build and it's less embodied carbon. But obviously we want to make sure we have a nice building. We don't have, you know, something that's really boring. It's nice to have some more exciting buildings. So we just have to work closely with Peter and John to make sure, as John said, the services can still pass between the kitchen and bedroom without the building falling over, essentially. So we'll get there hopefully. But this is all fresh off the press. Harshal was literally designing this on Friday afternoon, so doing his calculations.
Harshal, could you just rerun for me again which wall needs, because I went blank there for a little bit, weirdly. I lost
so last week we discussed this wall with Dan, but this wall because I did another check and it's still working considerably hard, so we'd like to add this wall here.
Okay, gotcha.
Which does run all the way up the building.
How does it work on one of the upper levels? Sorry to...
It's within this party wall.
Okay.
But I don't know if you have any services going from this.
No, the services will all come out into the common area there. So we wouldn't go straight into the bathroom or into the bedroom above. We'd come out into the common area and then service back into the flats.
But Arjun, which walls should we? I think I just heard Rachel, and then I went blank saying we should move a wall.
It's a ground floor. It's the commercial area.
Okay.
So this wall here, if you can see the faint.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Out. So it's in line with this column where this column was originally.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That would essentially eliminate that column there, and also would be able to eliminate this column.
From John's tank. That's great.
Yeah, and we'd need, so it's shown here, but it's taken out all the way up to 13th floor, where the building steps back. And in order to get that to work, we need to increase the thickness of this section of slab just to transfer that, because that point load is coming down. It's the point.
Increasing the thickness by 100 mil. Is that right? 100 millimeters?
Yeah. Oh, at the moment I've got a 300.
Can add in 50 mil or
50
so.
mil. Upwards rather than downwards. Rachel, yeah.
So just want to jump in here. Sorry, everyone. Really sorry to interrupt the meeting. We do have about 8 minutes left, though. So just a heads up. And students also, if you have any questions during these last few minutes, feel free to pop them in the chat box. Thanks. Sorry, continue.
Can I just jump in then? I've got a question because I'm looking at my layout for that same flat, that little the flat on
one at the front
nose, if you will.
Yeah.
And my layout is completely different, Peter. I probably shouldn't be saying this on this meeting, but if I can just show you my is that
John,
right?
I think we've a bit of a while ago now, but we've made some changes to the kitchen layout a bit.
This is based on the latest Revit model that we've got from PT.
I think the one that on screen is right, John. You might be looking at an older kitchen slightly.
Yeah, I suspect so, but I need to let me just find the right drawing. It's this one, and this layout, which is the same flat. I've got a completely different layout of the kitchen there, Peter. So I need to update that. That's in your model, is it? Yeah.
Quite useful. Yeah.
Okay. I need to.
Nick, do you think we can
see that?
After this, just fire over our latest one to John, just to make sure.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah. So you can see the problems we have here, where we're all going to make sure we're working on the same information. Yeah. And interestingly, in that wall you were talking about, Herschel, which is in this location here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got, these elements of drawing our ventilation ducts that pass through from the bedroom, the bathroom, and then make their way into a fan unit which sits here and then out through the external wall over the balcony. So yeah, if you combine those, and these are pipes that carry heating. We've got, interestingly at that point, we've got some drainage pipe work as well. So, I mean, let's have a look at the layouts once we get them through. But if you could send those across, Peter and Nick, that would be really useful for us. Yeah.
John, it'll just be that flat. I don't think you'll see any changes anywhere else.
Brilliant. Great. That would be good. Thank you.
So these meetings are good for exactly this kind of stuff, actually, just to make sure that, I mean, people keep on using the word probably coordinate, but it's really important for all of us to, as John was saying, kind of have all the same information and make sure we're all kind of aligning.
Well, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Peter, the last sort of 18 months, whilst we've been doing all these meetings on Zoom or Teams, we've still been able to carry on because we can share a screen like this, we can overlay models. You know, ordinarily, if we were at your office, we'd have all these drawings pinned up on the wall and get up with a felt pen or a marker and actually look at where the problems are. Yeah,
I think maybe for us this is almost better in some ways, this coordination on screen, because where, as you say, yeah, in the past we would have had things on walls, you know, printed drawings on paper, but the pace I think at which you can do some things now just by doing this exact thing is really good. I think it's quite useful.
And actually, there has been some benefit as well, I think, in that we've been able to involve more of our team in these meetings because they're sat on a Teams call or a Zoom call rather than, you know, traveling, and then you've got the time of traveling and sitting in meetings and traveling back, and then it's been easier to involve some of our trainees in design team meetings to sort of listen and understand how they work and what we talk about. Yeah, we don't just talk about the weather.
No, absolutely. I think this was such a great session for the students to sit in on too, because they could see kind of, you know, someone would say, oh, is this even okay? You know, it was a real meeting for students to see how it works.
It was for me, Rosie, because all my drawings are wrong now. I can see that. Yeah.
I know, and that happens.
Yeah.
You know, you don't come to these with everything perfect and plan. That's the point of these kinds of meetings.
I'm thinking, oh God, have we issued John? What have we not done? Have we not included him on it? So we'll automate as much as we can a lot of our processes. But sometimes
that's why we meet. Yeah,
we still have to meet because sometimes our systems might not have John's name on them, or I don't know, like it just sometimes technical things sit through the net or something where unless you meet like this, these things do kind of slip. And then I'm kind of hoping to myself, oh God, I hope we sent John the model, but then he's missed it or something, and then I don't feel so bad about it. But I'll be feeling really guilty if we haven't actually issued him our latest information. So yeah, these things they're really useful.
No, definitely. And students, we are wrapping up here kind of, but do any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask here before we go ahead and sign off for the day? Or any final comments, maybe thanking these employees for being here today and showing you kind of a morning in the life of what they do. If any of you have anything you'd like to say, go ahead and pop it in the chat box. But I want to thank all of you so much for being here. Again, it's just been so insightful for the students and really helpful. And I know in the breakout rooms, quite a lot of people said they just didn't know if it was what they wanted to do or if they wanted to do something else. So I think they really got a great opportunity today to see kind of what it would be like if they did choose to go down this path.
Rosie, just to jump in briefly as well, until students say things, if they like, is that we're here to answer any questions after this as well. So if somebody has something that they don't feel delighted about sharing this morning, you know, we're happy to answer other questions.
Great, thank you so much. How can they contact? Are they able to contact you in any way?
Is it possible to go through yourselves, actually? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So students, if you have any questions, I'll go ahead and pop my email in the chat. First in the chat box, I'm going to go ahead and put a survey. Please go ahead and fill that survey out. It'll help us make events like these be better and be more catered to you in the future. So please do go ahead and fill that out. And then this is my email. So if you have any questions for anyone today, please do go ahead and email me and I'll make sure to get it through to them. I see that there's a thank you for everyone involved. It's been fascinating. It seems like a lot of people are thinking that this has been very informative and interesting. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.